China is an expansionist empire. So when they occupied Tibet, they said Tibet is the palm. We got it now. Let's go after five fingers. Ladakh, Sikkim, Nepal, Bhutan, and Arunachal are five fingers, and they're coming after five fingers.
My first question to you is, how do you see the current situation between India and China? We saw the clashes on the 15th of June, which actually happened after 1.5 months of border face-off. There was news of disengagement, but now we are seeing fresh reports that the Chinese PLA has not in fact disengaged. Keeping in mind that this situation is likely to continue for a few weeks, maybe months, how do you see this situation from your perspective?
For us, it's deja vu all over again, because essentially China came in the name of peace and prosperity for the Tibetan people. But step by step, they take three steps ahead and take one step back, and then they take three steps ahead, take one step back. And ultimately, we lost our country, we lost our freedom. So they sweet talk you into things, and they talk of peace and harmony and peaceful liberation, things like that. Ultimately, it was a violent occupation of Tibet. Now, to understand China, you must understand what happened to Tibet, what's happening to Tibet. For example, the term Tunguo means middle kingdom. So they are the middle of the universe, and the rest are in the periphery are all barbarians. They ought to be civilized. So that was the justification. China is Tunguo, the middle kingdom of the universe, and periphery are Tibetans and the Uyghurs, Mongolians, and Manchurians. They all were quote unquote civilized, right? So this is the same expansionist policy that you see from South China Sea to East China Sea to Scarborough Island. And then, as you rightly said, the security law in Hong Kong is essentially to firm up their control over Hong Kong, and then their interference in the election of Taiwan. And on a daily basis, there were a lot of allegations from Taiwan. There was a the attacks and political meddling in the elections, and ultimately people in Taiwan spoke up and elected the pro-Taiwan candidate, so to speak, of DPP, and the pro-Beijing candidate lost the election. So similarly, weeks after weeks and months long, there were protests in Hong Kong, right? So people in Hong Kong and Taiwan are demanding basic human rights and freedom, but the Chinese government wants to control and clamp down.
We had India recognize Tibet as a part of China in various statements up till 2013. The India-Tibet border, as they call it, though we still have a force called the Indo-Tibetan Border Police. Many people now call it the Indo-China border. So can you help us understand strategically, what does India have to gain in ensuring that the sovereignty of Tibet is restored to its former?
No, I think it's pretty straightforward. In the last 70 years, since Tibet border changed to Indo-China border, 1962 war happened, 1967 war happened, 2017 Doklam, and border incursions from 200 to 300 and 400 is yearly occurrence, and the violence that happened recently, right? So what did India gain after recognizing Indo-China border? Tension after tension, and conflicts after conflicts. India spends about $60 billion a year, patrolling the border of Tibet, originally, now China, right? And it has to spend so much. Now, historically, for hundreds of years, for thousands of years, when it was Tibet India border, peace, perpetual peace. Tibet was a zone of peace. Tibet was the buffer zone between India and China. And Indian soldiers, they don't have to face even a single Chinese police. Forget our army, right?
So, would you say that the Indian government perhaps needs to revisit its policy on recognizing Tibet as a part of China? I understand that you don't normally comment on the internal decision making of the Indian government, but as a political leader of the Tibetan community, do you think that it's time for India to relook at how it looks at China with the one China policy?
We are a guest here, so we are very appreciative of the host and what India and Indian people has done the most to Tibetan people. So we can't be demanding per se, as per our values and tradition. Having said that, you need to revisit the debate that took place in the Indian Parliament in 1950s. What did Deen Dayal Upadhyay ji said? What did Ram Manohar Lohia ji said? What about Jai Prakash Narayan ji said? What about Sardar Bharabhai Patel? And even Ambedkar spoke on Tibet. All of them said one thing: we cannot have China enter Tibet easily. We will pay a price in the long run. They will come to our border and the price will be much higher. So let's support Tibet then. Let's do all we can. So that was the debate. That was almost a consensus among, one section of politicians, right? And all of them, whatever they have said, is becoming prophetic now, right? And just, when the former defense minister, George Fernandez, right now, he said, it's not LOC, it's LAC we should be worried about. It's not Pakistan, but rather China will be #1 adversary. And he was criticized by parties and leaders all across political parties. Now his words are vindicated by all these actions, recent actions. So, what I say is one thing. What did the great Indian leaders like Jai Prakash Narayan said, Kripalani said, those has to be taken into consideration. And I think they need to be heard, and their voices and their views should be reviewed and then implemented if possible.
I'm talking about Nepal, which has the current leadership in Nepal is, of course, closely politically tied with the Chinese political leadership, the CCP. While they're at it, there's also talk going on in the Nepalese parliament about the border row with India. Even the issue between India and Nepal has become a bit of an unprecedented situation. Do you have an advice or do you have a take on this situation, given that China also has a very important role to play in this picture?
So I'm not aware of all the details. But having said that, as I said, China is an expansionist empire. So when they occupied Tibet, they said Tibet is the palm. We got it now. Let's go after 5 fingers. Ladakh, Sikkim, Nepal, Bhutan, and Arunachal are 5 fingers, and they're coming after 5 fingers. So they are putting pressure not to all the neighboring countries, including Nepal, even in Bangladesh, even in Sri Lanka, even in Maldives. You can clearly see, So this is what they're trying to do. So obviously, Nepal is under pressure.
Okay. My final question to you is, we have seen recent reports by Chinese state media, which we understand is closely tied with the political leadership over there. But we've seen reports on Chinese media which say that the PLA has started recruiting people from the Tibetan region for its militia and for its border forces, because they have the advantage of already being acclimatized to that region, and also they have the advantage of knowing the language. Now, we understand that Tibet has been under Chinese control for the last 60, 70 years. But the fact that the native Tibetans are now being recruited into the PLA is a bit of a reason for alarm. So what is your take on this issue?
We believe in non-violence. We believe in ahimsa. We do not condone violence. So having said that, I think any Tibetan who is in Tibet, they have tremendous respect for India. Our dharam, Buddhism came from India, our alphabet came from India, our culture, geographically, we all are connected that way. So deep down, I know, Tibetans in India have tremendous respect for, Tibetans in Tibet has tremendous respect for India. And particularly, 154 Tibetans committed self-immolation, burned themselves, protesting against the repressive policies of the Chinese government. In 2008, there was nationwide protests against Chinese government for the occupation and repression of the Tibetan people. So this is the sentiment of the Tibetan people. So we always urge them to be peaceful, to be traditional, to be respectful of everybody, and we must respect compassion and kindness.
Thank you so much.